Good evening and welcome to Science Banner. Just double checking my lines because I'm hearing a little bit of feedback. So just checking everything out. Here we go. I'm bringing this down just a little, hoping that this works. There we go. Um, I'm just trying to figure out. I've got a little bit of feedback, and so I'm trying to figure out why I'm getting the feedback. So, it's just kind of strange. I've never had this happen before, so I'm going to bring this down. There we go. Yep, I'm. This should be better. You're still getting some echo. I'm going to bring this way down and see if that helps. Um, so, just wondering what's going on. I think I'm okay. Could be a few second delay in the mic. Um, well, good evening. I'm going to try to make this work um, and see if the echo is real bad. Um, Guys, let me know if the echo is too much. And I'm just going to start saying my highs. Um, and I'm also going to check the mic settings just to make sure that we've got. Okay. There we go. Oh, I see. There's a delay in the mic. I'm going to drop this down just a little bit here to a 0. Um, there we go. That should be better. 0. There we go. That should take care of any delay in the mic. Work with that a little bit. Okay, hopefully that sounds a little better. Still picking up a little bit of gain on the mic. Sometimes it could be just a kind of a thing with tonight. Oh, wait, nope, I see what's going on. This mic is picking up some extra gain. I'm going to adjust this and 0 it. For some reason, it's... There we go. That should be better. Okay, that should be good. The mic picked up gain. It seems to be doing it a lot, and I'm not sure why. That should be better. I'm also gonna reset this. There we go. It should kick in momentarily. Not quite sure why everything's acting so funny this evening. Okay. Well, I'm gonna say hi to everyone there. I'll keep working with this Hey, just a little info. I've not forgotten about the Rabbi Akiva questions, and I'll be getting more information out. Oh, there we go. Wait a minute. Okay. I'm seeing what's going on here. There. That should be better. And I'm going to play with the mic here and see if that helps. I'm not sure. It looks like the volume and the gain are together. Okay. Anyway, I'm just going to go for it. Sorry about the delay. My computer went funky. And so that's kind of where things are at. Slowly return. I'm playing with the audio properties, and it shouldn't be. Let's try that. No. Checking that. Okay. Final setting. There we go. That should take care of it. Let me do a hi, everybody. There were 3 settings that were constantly changing on me, and I'm not sure why they were doing that. So I'm terribly sorry for that. Somehow the computer got funky, and that sort of happens. And so we just got a little lost. You know, I hate that sort of thing. It doesn't make things as professional as I would like. But every so often my computer just does weird things that I don't fully understand. Let's get down to it tonight. My mic software just kind of went kaflooey, and it's now back in measure. And I've got everything. I don't know why all the settings went nuts, but they just did tonight. This is an important topic. Maybe there's somebody who doesn't want us going over this. Not to give too much credit to the enemy, but I'm sure he can work through settings, and I'm sure he can help me to mess them up. So let's get on to it. I am thrilled everyone's here. You know, hopefully people who see this video will love it, and they'll bear with the fact that my PC and studio here is a little homespun. I love the comment, the homespun feel. I hope I can kind of keep it homespun yet worthwhile. And these things happen. We're going to get to the PowerPoint. There we go. And I'm going to make that a little bigger. In fact, what I may do is make that much bigger. Put this on top. Okay, and I'm going to try to order this on the very top, and I'm going to see if I can give you the full thing tonight. So I'm going to try to make this bigger and see if this really helps. There we go. And really try to get this bigger for you because I want you to be able to see it okay. I've been working on the writing. I'm going to transition in here. This should come up right away, and the PowerPoint should be a little crisper tonight. We're in Matthew 5. We're going to hit some real interesting stuff. Does the issue of sexual ethics apply to our society today? Well, I think it does. And while I won't wax eloquent on some of the weirder things going on, and maybe that would be good for a show because I've been asked about transgenderism in my Sunday school class. Go figure. I'm in a Southern Baptist Sunday school class, and the issue of transgenderism because of creation came up. And I may just do a show dealing with kind of trying to form a Christian worldview in relation to transgenderism and the fact that there are some genetic abnormalities out there. So if that would be an interest to you, you can let me know. It would be fun to apply the Christian worldview to a real life problem here and see if we can look at some verses and come up with some principles, because I think that's the key. is what do we know from the scriptures and how can we apply it to the situation. But we're going to deal with more mundane things that are really equally controversial, by the way. Even these issues that aren't as much about genetic abnormalities and identity are equally important. What you're going to see tonight is that Jesus held a higher standard um, than some of the rabbis of his day. And we're going to take a look at what his standard was compared to the rabbis of the Second Temple period in general, not specifically. It's not going to be a complete Talmudic survey. Um, um, so, but it is going to be a little bit more general. And so we're going to take a look at marriage and how Jesus viewed it. Uh, and look at his standard. I'm also figuring out that emoticons are there for a reason, and probably to help people type. So, let's take a look at how the rabbis viewed marriage and divorce. The section we're going to be dealing with is going to go all the way from 27 through 52. Actually, we're doing two pericopes tonight, not one pericope. That's not the way I've normally operated, but these two pericopes are around the area of sexual ethics, and they really kind of go together. And I'm not saying the others don't; they all interlock. But these are so directly of the same topic. And really, I could say that I'll show you how 4 builds and 5 builds um, based on these two pericopes, because they sort of do. But these are really in the same ballpark, and they really were hot questions. So let's get to it. The focus under Pharisaic teaching was on the act. You need to understand this. The Pharisees dealt with the action. They didn't really focus on the motivation as much. Now, I know Pirkei Avot does discuss motivation, and other Talmud tractates do, but there was an intense emphasis on the act, on the mitzvah or on the sin as an act. Just to give you a little bit of information from my background, I never thought of sin as being a nature. Jewish people don't. If you tell Jewish people they have a sin nature, they look at you funny because Jews are used to thinking in terms of sin being an action. And so Pharisaic teaching was on that. Now, how do I know that? Right from the beginning of the pericope, you have heard it said, to those of old, you shall not commit adultery. So Jesus is repeating what would be the understood teaching at the time. But I say to you that whosoever looks at a woman to lust for her has committed adultery with her in his heart. Now, this is different than the Pharisaic emphasis. I'm not saying motivations aren't discussed in Talmud. Kavanah and right intention is important. Now, Kavanah refers to worship and intentionality in worship, focus. But what I am saying is that there was less emphasis on this. So Jesus is going to take these commands, he's going to lay out his Torah in terms of these commands. Now, he's going to give us the basic spirit of Torah here. And what he's taking them back to is what God intended, and he is legislating what God intended for his community. And in that sense, in giving them new instruction, he is giving them new Torah. And so he is now taking it a step deeper. It's not just about what you do, it's the heart of the matter. Jesus is going to keep going to the heart or the motivation rather than stay on the surface. And we're going to see, even in terms of these commands, that the rabbis were even a little laxer. In fact, at this point in history, polygamy is not totally outlawed according to Jewish law. Not that it was commonly practiced, not that it was encouraged. It just wasn't outright forbidden. At least among the Ashkenazi, it's not forbidden until much later. Understand why. It's not as though the Ashkenazi rabbis wanted Jewish people to be polygamous. The reason that this was the case was they didn't want to outright come against Torah. And since Torah had laws about how to treat the first wife, her getting the lion's share and not being able to be looked passed over for a second wife or a third wife, they felt funny about saying the Torah was these Torah commands were somehow um, abated. You see, the problem when you have Torah is if you don't have an oral Torah and you don't have the New Testament, you're sunk. In fact, I've said it before, if you don't have the New Testament, you need a second set of writings because you can't really make out sense out of the biblical narrative without a second set of writings. Because the story goes to a certain point and then it's like being in the middle of a mystery and then you don't have the end. And so later on, this is outlawed, but Jesus is constantly bringing them back to the Father's intent, the heart of the Torah. And so we're going to go ahead and look at this. Now, he says, whoever looks at a woman to lust. If he had just said whoever looks at a woman, then any time that I saw a female, I would be in sin. Okay? And so there's an intent there that Jesus is getting to. What is the basis for the Father's desire as far as sexual ethics? Now, if we can learn to do this, we can solve so many problems. If I do a transgender thing, I'm going to do it in terms of the original design and what happened to that design and how that design is upheld. Because everything goes back to the narrative, who God is, and then what God commands comes out of who God is and what we're meant to be. And this is especially true of Israel because the relationship between a husband and wife was to mirror the relationship between Israel and her God. God is the spiritual husband. And by the way, Paul does the same thing with the church and Jesus. Check out Ephesians. But we're going to go from Jesus giving instructions to a primarily Jewish audience. What would they have had available to them? Well, they would have had the prophets available to them, and they would have had the concept that the covenant of God with Israel is very much like a marriage covenant because God uses this sort of language. Let's look at Isaiah 54:5. For your maker is your husband, says the Lord of hosts, is his name, and your Redeemer is the Holy One of Israel. He is called the God of the whole earth. So your maker, Israel, is your husband. You see the marital language there. So Israel's standard is based on the fact not only of the character of God, but God's intended relationship with Israel was to mirror marriage. So it's to be a reflection of God's relationship with Israel, and it's to be a reflection of God's character. And so the ethics for marriage should have stemmed from those things. Okay? Adultery, Israel is considered an adulterous wife. If you want to look at adultery in marriage, I'm going to say this over again. This is one of my problems. If you start with just the idea of the reformers, you're ignoring a whole lot of interpretation in biblical theology. Okay, now what I mean by that is not that the reformers don't have some good commentary, but you have to understand if you want to get a picture of marriage, you have the garden and then you have God's relationship with marriage, with Israel, before you have Christ in the church. If the church is the bride of Christ purchased by Jesus' death, then the church comes after God sets up a covenant relationship with Israel. Just historically, that's true. And so when we look at these doctrines, we need to pull them through biblical theology. That's the way we should get our systematics. Now, sometimes you have to start with your systematics, because if you know nothing, you need to, what is God like? Okay, so we have some systematic theology that names some of his attributes. But how does that play out? And the Bible tells us more about what those terms mean and how they work. And they just give us a background. and they really govern your systematic theology. If I say God's love, I can make that systematic statement only if the biblical theology supports it, and it does. So the picture in Hosea, and read the prophets this way, okay? The picture in Hosea is that Israel is the adulterous wife. Understand that. And then apply it to us as believers. Are we being adulterous? Comes after you understand the original context. Let's look at Hosea 1:2. And the Lord began to speak to Hosea. The Lord said to Hosea, take for yourself a wife of harlotry and children of harlotry, for the land has committed harlotry, departing from the Lord. So when we look at this issue of adultery, this issue has been dealt with on a corporate level between God and Israel, even before the instructions that Jesus is going to end up giving. There's a backdrop to this whole thing and the way the rabbis should have viewed it. Okay? As I said, the issue is lust. The issue is not the fact that we're male and female. The issue is not that males will find some females attractive someday. Okay? In other words, the issue is not that we're not repulsed as males by females, or that females are supposed to be repulsed by us. That wouldn't be very effective. Whoever looks at a woman to lust. Now, I said that before, but what does that really end up meaning? What do we have from the Greek? Jesus is being very clear. Okay? The intent is there. To lust is an infinitive. That's how I know. When I look at it to lust, and I see to lust in English, I know that's the purpose he's referring to. But the Greek even amplifies it. You're looking with the purpose of lusting. You're not looking with any other purpose. Okay? You're not looking to simply think this is a lovely lady. You are looking with the intent of something. The heart is the center of the being. We understand that. Cross my heart and hope to die. We use that sort of terminology. It's one of the terms that is used, the lev. And so he has already committed the adultery because he's already fixated on the intent. And think about the way things happen in your life. Have you ever done something you haven't thought about first? Well, I should be a little careful about that. Can you commit an action without the mental state of thought having occurred? And I would say, for most of us, the idea at least has to come into our heads. Generally, the idea may fleetingly come into our heads, but we have to give a little focus to it. Generally, we then have to decide or intend to do the act, and then finally the act comes. There's a way we're constructed. And so the intent has to be there. And once the intent is there, and that intent is part of everything, then even though the action has not occurred, the violation morally is already present. In other words, God cares what you think and what you intend to do. He's not just interested in what you do, he's also interested in what you intend to do. He's also interested in what you think. And so the backdrop of this is, should the rabbis know better? Well, yeah, they should. Thinking about other gods and focusing on worshiping them would be spiritual adultery. How much more is looking at a woman with the intent that is wrong adultery? They have a backdrop for this. These ethics aren't coming out of the blue. Now, let's look at a real neat thing. I don't have the book with me. We did a kids program when I discipled my sons right before their 13th birthday. We had a messianic bar mitzvah thing where they went through a discipleship program. The girls had bat mitzvahs and they did a discipleship program, and we set that up as kind of a discipling sort of tool. And I want to show you how this sort of works and plays out in David's life. 2 Samuel 11:2. Ask yourself, when did David commit adultery? And it happened in the evening that David arose from his bed and walked on the roof of the king's house. And from the roof he saw a woman bathing, and the woman was very beautiful to behold. Now, the minute he saw her, it was time to veer his eyes and go away. We'll talk a little more about that, and then we'll get into the area of marriage. But he didn't do that. There's much discussion of Bathsheba. There is a ritual cleansing that women were required to do, given women's physiology. And the question is, was Bathsheba simply following a command, and so she was bathing to purify herself? Or was she just kind of not being very modest? Yes, someone quoted it. I'm going to give credit. I'm going to give credit. Corinth quoted, sow a thought, reap an action, sow an action, reap a habit, sow a habit, reap a character, sow a character, reap a destiny. It is an absolutely incredibly sound quote. You can go ahead and put that on your refrigerator because that is just a perfect chain of events sort of thing. So kudos for bringing that up. David gives what we call the second look. And when I did the discipleship with my sons, I talked about the second look. It's not the first look that gets you in trouble. It's the second look. And the second look will get you killed. Okay? Now, David could have stopped with the second look, but what happened was something happened in his heart that goes further. David sent and inquired about the woman. This is following through. And someone tells him that she is the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite. Okay? At that point, lust is giving birth to sin. Now he's already committed adultery in his heart, but now he's taking the steps. So how do you fall? You window shop on evil. Window shopping too long on evil will definitely cause you to want to buy one. Paul ends up saying, you brethren have been called to liberty, only do not use your liberty as an opportunity for the flesh, but through love serve one another. Galatians 5:13. By the way, you were called to liberty. The beautiful thing about grace is the incredible freedom that it brings. The danger is license. Legalism leads to self-righteousness, but liberty can lead to license. So if you window shop long enough, you'll want to purchase. 2 Timothy 2:22, we all know this. Run the other way. Physically remove yourself, but mentally remove yourself. And that's why it says to Timothy, flee useful lusts and pursue righteousness. Because Timothy's a young guy when he enters into being placed at the church in Ephesus. And so he is told to be careful because young men need to be careful. Do old men need to be careful? Yes, but we kind of understand what Paul's getting to. Now, this dovetails into the marriage issue. Because obviously adultery would interfere with marriage. But I can end up violating marriage without necessarily committing full-fledged adultery. And this is where the rabbis tended to really have a different view. You're going to understand why Jesus is continually asked about marriage by the time tonight's over. It's not accidental. He's asked about marriage for a particular reason. And we need to understand the backdrop of this, okay? Material explaining Jesus' teaching in view of the views of the Second Temple period. Now, I want to be real careful here. I don't know your life situations. And I don't ever want to come off as self-righteous or insensitive, especially where I have dear brothers and sisters who may have gone through tough life situations. I am going to explain this material in view of the rabbinical views of the Second Temple period and then present Jesus' ethics. I am not going to go ahead and counsel you in individual situations. This is not intended to counsel you. This was originally done at a Messianic congregation with different life situations. So I want to be sensitive here. But you do need to understand what Jesus is talking about. Let me give you a word or two. Let me get pastoral for just a second here, okay? If you are remarried, remain faithful to that marriage and expect God's blessing, because God is a good God and He will meet you where you're at. Many times a believer will end up becoming or coming to faith after a situation in which they are remarried. And I would say your job then is to make that marriage work. No recriminations. By grace we stand. Does it mean God doesn't care about marriage? Well, we're going to see He does. But that's your life situation. And if I was sitting in a pastoral situation, I would say, make it work. Okay? God is good. Make it work. The fact that God may bless your second marriage doesn't change Jesus' teaching. I don't like when people do this. I'll have some young person come to me and they'll say, well, my cousin ended up dating an unbeliever and he got saved and that makes it okay. So there's no reason that you should teach don't be spiritually unequally yoked. Folks, God meets us where we're at. He's not necessarily condoning every little thing we do. We make mistakes and He blesses us anyway. This is called grace. And He blesses us as we turn to Him and ask for His help in those situations. And He blesses us as we look to Him where we find ourselves. But please don't assume that God's blessing now makes what you've done in every situation a command. I don't want to take you there. That would be bad pastoral advice. Okay? If you only acted based on what you understand, then you are only responsible for what you understand. That's a real important thing. You can't be responsible for that which you didn't know about. Okay? And so I want to say to you, the knowledge you had at the time you made the decision is the knowledge that God allowed you to have. Um, and so, um, understand God works with us where we're at, even as far as our knowledge. Now, I want you to understand this is a big deal for Second Temple Judaism. Okay? Two rabbinical schools were really big. Now, we go through, like yesterday, we talked about the levels of the transmission of the scriptures and the development of the Talmud, and you end up with pairs. Okay? Pairs of rabbinical schools. Then you move to the Tanaim. I mean, actually, you start with just the scribes and Then you end up with the pairs of rabbinical schools. Then you end up with the Tanaim, then the Amorim. During this period of time, before this period of time, there were two big rabbinical schools. I'm always talking about them, Hillel and Shammai. Now, you need to understand that they differed on the area of marriage, divorce, and remarriage. So this is the backdrop from which Jesus is speaking. Hillel said, if she burns your supper, you can divorce her. Thank you very much, Hillel. He took the widest possible use of allowing for divorce. Shammai said for unchastity or unfaithfulness only. Akiva said, okay, you may divorce a woman if you find one more attractive than your wife is presently. Gittim 9:10. So there were different views on divorce and remarriage, and this forms the background. Jesus is going to give this teaching, and then he's going to be questioned about it again right around Matthew 19. somewhere right in there, I think it is Matthew 19, he's going to be questioned about this again because this was a hot topic in Jesus's day. So you can see the range of opinions. The strictest interpretation of the clause that would be run to in Deuteronomy was taken by Shammai. Hillel was more liberal, and then Akiva, good gravy. If you find one more attractive than her, seriously. Okay? Do understand that as they're working with this, the rabbis always believed that the receiving of the law was essentially a marriage ceremony. By the way, that's part of the reason that it is believed by the rabbis. And James talks about it. You receive the law. And then it talks about the angels being there under the management of angels. That's not the word James actually uses. But the idea was that the covenant at Sinai was essentially a marriage contract between God and Israel. Okay? So I stuck up the verse there. Now, therefore, if you will indeed heed my voice and keep my covenant, you will be a special treasure to me above all the people. For all the earth is mine, and you will be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words which you shall speak to the children of Israel. And so Moses came and called for the elders of the people, and before them all the words which the Lord commanded him. And then the people answered, all the words which the Lord has spoken, we will do. Now that's an I do in the mind of the rabbis. That's why God could talk about this as spiritual adultery, because it was essentially viewed as a marriage covenant between this nation, this ethnic group, and God. So the I do, all the words we will do, is essentially an I do. Okay. Hosea 16 and 17, there should be a hyphen. Okay, says the Lord, you will call me my husband and no more my master. It's a word play on Baal and Baali. Baali. Okay, and Baalim, there's a word play going on here. The word Baal is actually the word master. Baali, my master, my husband, and there's a word play. And God says, essentially, I'm going to purify you of your wandering heart and your idolatries, and you will call me my husband again. So the picture in Hosea is of God healing the adulterous heart of Israel. But was divorce allowed? Well, in the framework of Hosea, where marriage is talked about in terms of Israel and God, and the intent of God as far as faithfulness and marriage is being displayed, a bill of divorcement was allowed. Now, this is what's called the exception clause. Someone asked about the Hebrews verse. If they want to post it, I'll do a comparison because it may just be a difference in the Septuagint. Do understand that what these rabbis are responding to is how do you interpret the exception clause? So when Shammai says for unchastity only, he's dealing with this whole section in Deuteronomy 24:1, and he's interpreting it one way. Hillel's interpreting another way. And so you have that other way that Hillel's interpreting it, and then you have Akiva, and I don't know how he's getting to his position, but it centers around this section. When a man takes a wife and marries her, and it happens he finds no favor in his eyes, see, no favor in his eyes, and Hillel's saying that means his eyes aren't glad to see her anymore because he's found someone more attractive. Okay, she's not pretty to him anymore. There's no favor in his eyes. Shammai says, focuses on the other half of the verse because he's found some uncleanness in her, unchastity in her. So Shammai's saying for unchastity or unfaithfulness, she is sexually unclean in some way. because she has violated her marriage vows and has been with another, so he has found uncleanness in her. Hillel says she finds no favor in his eyes because she has violated her wifely duties in some way. This is the verse that it centers around. And what they're trying to do is interpret Torah, but they're ignoring the purpose of the Torah and the intent of the Torah, and they're focusing on the minutia of the rules. And this is what you see in Judaism a whole lot. Let's find a rule for it. Let's find a dictum. No, let's look at the original intent of God. Let's examine what's really the intent. Deuteronomy goes on and gives the procedure. What if this does happen? When she has departed from her house and goes and becomes another man's wife, if the latter husband detests her and writes her a certificate of divorce, okay, so you had to put something in her hand. And the word divorce there has to do with the idea of shalach, sending her away. Okay, a certificate of shalach, essentially. Puts it in her hand and sends her out of the house. He sends her. If the latter husband dies, who took her for his wife, and her former husband, who had divorced her, must not take her back as wife, since she has been defiled, and this would be an abomination to the Lord. So you can't be remarried to your previously divorced wife, according to this passage. It would be disallowed. If the previous husband died, she's available. You can't take her back as a wife. Now, am I saying this is for the church? I'm saying this were the ethics that were laid down. Okay. Now I'm going to get controversial. So I'm going to tell you my thinking. Divorce did not necessarily terminate the marriage covenant. What? It created separation. But does every divorce necessarily immediately create another marriage covenant? Does it necessarily terminate the marriage? Okay, now if she married another, you would say, well, it had to terminate the marriage or you have bigamy. But if she was unmarried and there was a divorce, did that necessarily mean the marriage covenant's been terminated? The marriage covenant's between the two people and God. Did God agree with these two people? Thus says the Lord, where is the certificate of your mother's divorce, whom I have put away? Where are the creditors to whom she has sold you? I have sold you. For your iniquities you have sold yourself, and for your transgression your mother has been put away. What the Bible indicates is that God has temporarily divorced Israel. However, what the Bible also indicates is that God is going to restore that marriage. On what basis? Well, first keep in mind that Israel as a whole no longer worships any Baals, Astaroth, or anything else. They are improbable, at best, they are improperly worshiping the one true God, but they aren't as a nation worshiping other gods deliberately. I want to be a little careful. I understand about false idols and things of that nature, but they have never taken upon themselves a covenant with another deity as a nation. Does that make sense? I hope it's making sense to you. So there has been no remarriage on a corporate level between Israel and some other spiritual being, regardless of individual sin, regardless of rejection of Messiah. So there is a certificate of shalach that has been given, and in a sense, Israel has been sent out of the place of blessing, thus out of that house, but there has not been marriage to another deity. And then God promises, you will call me my husband again, and he will restore that marital relationship. By the way, there is nothing in Torah that says that if a woman doesn't remarry, that first marriage could not be restored. In other words, if there was a temporary separation, it does not mean that could not be repaired. That's another question. Directly, I can't find a verse that directly forbids that. If she marries another, then it seems to speak to that. Okay? Jeremiah 3, 8 and 9. I have put her away and given her a certificate of divorce. Yet her treacherous sister Judah did not fear. It's northern kingdom, southern kingdom. But went and played the harlot also. 9. So it came to pass through her casual harlotry that she defiled the land and committed adultery. Listen to the language here. The language of adultery here. She's committed adultery with stones and trees. Now, figuratively, stones and trees being sacred high places and Aseroth poles. Yet for all her treacherous sister did not turn with me with her whole heart, but with pretense. I want you to see that God says he'd given her a certificate of shalach, of divorce. We call it a get in Hebrew now. And the rabbis will talk about getting a get. But look at 3:14. Return, O backsliding children, says Jehovah, I am a husband unto you. Wait a minute. After he gave her a certificate of divorce in the previous verse and says that he has given her a certificate of divorce, he says he is a husband to her. And I will take you, 1 to a city and 2 to a family, and I will bring you to Zion. The language there. You have divorce, but then you have God still calling himself her rightful husband. Now, I'm creating this backdrop because as we look at the theology of divorce and remarriage, this is what we need to go back to. First and foremost, and see basically how Jesus and the people back then would have understood this. Furthermore, it has been said, whosoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. This is right out of Deuteronomy. But I say to you, whoever divorces his wife for any reason except sexual immorality causes her to commit adultery. So the only reason for separation under normal circumstances, we're not talking about abusive situations, under normal circumstances, would be that of sexual immorality. But look at Jesus's incredible statement here. So, okay, everyone's off the hook. Whoever marries a woman who is divorced commits adultery. Check out Matthew 5:31. Okay, in fact, the New King James says, whosoever marries a woman who is divorced commits adultery. Well, wait a minute, how could he be committing adultery? She's not married. Well, because divorce doesn't necessarily terminate the marriage covenant, death does. Now, I'm not casting dispersions on anyone. I'm just telling you, first century, factoring in Jesus' words, he's going back to Deuteronomy, and he's giving them the intended intent of the Father and the interpretation of the passage in light of the rabbinical schools that were around. Does that make you uncomfortable? It should make any of us uncomfortable. And Jesus is taking a very high view. But what he's saying basically to Hillel and Shammai is, look, if I have to go ahead and say that anything gives permission for a husband to send his wife away, then I would have to say that the grounds that Shammai gives are better than the grounds that Hillel gives or Akiva gives. So at least Shammai's closer than Hillel and Akiva are. Because if you divorce a woman and send her out of your house because she burnt your breakfast, you're causing her to commit adultery. If you send her out of her house because you found another one you like better, you're causing her to commit adultery. By the way, you might say, how are you causing her to commit adultery? There was no safety net for women in the ancient world. Where's this woman going to go? Well, maybe back to her father's house. But it's not like she's going to open 65 businesses and get wealthy. There wasn't much of a place for her. So now you're putting her in the position that is extremely hard in that society, in that culture. So Jesus is reacting to Hillel and Shammai and some of the rabbis of the period. Since you asked, since this is going to come up, let me tell you. And I have a really high standard. I put up the Greek in the next slide for sexual immorality. It's the word porneos. It's the word we get pornographic from. Okay? It refers to all manner of sexual misconduct. Okay? It does not simply refer to adultery, it refers to fornication. It refers to all sorts of aberrant sexual behavior of any kind. And the word uncleanness in the Greek is the word sexual immorality. So the uncleanness there is sexual. In fact, it's more than sexual. It's probably sexually connected with false worship. Now, here's what I'm going to say. I'm going to tell you what I'm not going to say. Remarriage, even according to the exception clause, is sternly discouraged. Okay, so what I'm saying is the church ought not go to great lengths to encourage remarriage. Now, I'm not casting aspersions on anyone's situation. I'm saying it is not the church's business to be a second marriage dating society. I am uncomfortable with that. There was a group out of a church in Vermont. It was essentially a dating service for previously divorced individuals. It had a funny sort of name to it. I could see divorce recovery, um, but this wasn't the name of it. It was called Single Again. Single Again? And it just really was a dating service. And it was not helping people work through issues as much as it sort of became a club. This is not good conduct. Okay? Things happen, I know, but the church is not in the business of encouraging serial monogamy. Here's a comment that horrified me once that a Muslim made. He said, "You Christians believe in multiple polygamy too. You just do it one spouse at a time." And I thought, oh my word, what are we telling to the world? Okay? We might just be sending the wrong message. We need to be careful with this stuff. We need to at least hold to a high view. Here's the design, okay? Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. The word joined is the word debak. It's quite an incredible word. It has the idea of physically sticking to each other. An illustration might be like gluing two pieces of paper together and letting the glue dry. How do you separate those two pieces of paper? Well, you're going to damage both pieces. And so that's kind of what's going on there. And so the design, and if we get into this, the sexual politics of the aberrations, okay, we'll go back to this verse because this is a key verse. We have this verse, and then we have the verse around the fall, and then we probably look at Romans 8, and then we look at some other verses to form a set of principles. But do understand that we would have to go back to this original intent. This is where we get our things. Is who is God? Well, he's the faithful husband. He's the faithful father. He's the faithful master. Okay. And then, given the way he designed things, how did he design marriage to reflect him? Okay. And so we're looking at the design. This is the way things ought to be in a perfect world. If the fall hadn't happened and sin hadn't happened, this is what God intended. This is the way it was supposed to be. Okay? What did God do for Israel? Well, we said what God's going to do for Israel. I want you to see that God is the husband who runs after the unfaithful wife. God is the father who runs after his wayward creational children. I didn't say redemptive, creational. God is the father in the parable of the prodigal son. Jehovah said to me, go again and love a woman beloved of her friend and an adulteress, even as Jehovah loveth the children of Israel, though they have turned unto other gods and loved raisin cakes. That's a reference to false worship of the Queen of Heaven. We need to have that sort of faithfulness. We need to have that sort of marital faithfulness that reflects God's faithfulness to his creation, his desire to seek the lost and restore relationship, and that same sort of faithfulness. That shouldn't be too crazy, but I'm going to plead for it. I'm going to actually plead that this should be the way we should look at things. Why? Because divorce is almost assumed in our society. My daughter shared something that just floored me. She said that some of her friends asked how long her parents were married, and she told them that we've been married, I have to think back here, about 30 years. And her friends were shocked. Why should they be shocked? That should be the norm, especially with longer lifespans. They're shocked because divorce is almost a given. And while that's true in the world, the sad part is that's true in the church. The divorce rate among believers and followers of Jesus doesn't vary from the world. That is shocking to me. That is problematic to me. Someone congratulated me. That's because my wife is a very patient person, not because I'm a perfect husband. So that's kudos to my wife. While God does not necessarily hate your remarriage, if you are remarried, okay, I want to be sensitive to this. He doesn't like remarriage as regular conduct, okay? He understands your situation and he loves you. And if you're in Christ, you're forgiven. But he doesn't want that to be the way it is. It's not the way it was meant to be. It's not the situation that he hopes for or longs for. I also have to let you know that it's really cool if that second marriage works. It needs to work, okay? But I do want to give you a statistic. 40% of those who divorce and remarry will have their second marriage fail. I got that from Illustrations and Signs of the Time, Paul Lee Tam, 1996. I'm not making it up. This is somebody who used this even as an illustration. I'm saying it's not a good place to start. And it's not what God wants for everybody. And it's not the norm. Your situation is your situation. God will work through your situation. But your situation isn't what he wants to be the regular course of things. So you are in a situation of grace in which he's working things out. If you're in that situation, make it work and demonstrate the character of God in that second marriage. But let's not make that the defining feature of the church, because I would be uncomfortable with that. Okay, hard thing to say. Even where there's a villain and there's a non-villain, we can contribute to things in negative ways. So I'm going to say that divorce represents a spiritual failure on the part of the individuals. It's okay, we all fail. Okay? But it's not a spiritual success. It does represent a spiritual failure. It's okay. We pick up, and you can have a beautiful testimony and a beautiful life and be of great service to the Lord. And I'm not saying that. I'm saying it's not a success. It needs to be viewed as a loss. It needs to be viewed as that. Legal separation is more allowable. And by the way, legal separation is dangerous, but it's allowable. It's only dangerous because the enemy will use it. Okay, Satan longs to get his little grubby claws in. And so it needs to be viewed carefully, and it needs to be something where you're aware that the enemy is going to use this. So get good counsel, have loving pastors and those who can counsel you. But I don't like it when Christians say the first line of defense is just get rid of the bum. Okay? Because that's not the ultimate picture of Christ. Jesus redeems bums. And so we want to encourage credible displays. One of the stories I will tell, and I'll leave the names off, is a couple that got divorced in Vermont, and then after years, they re-established their marriage. They had never married anyone else. And they became an incredible testimony to the church. What an incredible picture that was. Reconciliation played out. And I knew the couple, and she passed away a little while ago of kidney problems. She was on dialysis for years. Sweet couple. But what a testimony they had, because they were not the social norm. And I'm encouraging that we need more stories like that. We don't need more separation stories. We need more reconciliation stories. So Jesus is responding to the Judaism of the Second Temple period, and he is laying down some real tough stuff. Okay, he's going to lay it down again too. This is not going to be popular. Hillel is not going to like Jesus's. The followers of Hillel are not going to like Jesus's answer. The disciples of Shammai may like it a little better, but they're not going to like it totally either. Akiva, you could forget about it. He's definitely not going to like it. And his followers, aren't necessarily going to like it. Marriage has to be entered in with great solemnity. Now, that doesn't mean solemnity equals time. You can wait years and not be very solemn. Dating is a weak model. I tend to like courtship a little better. Okay? Just because it provides some protections, and it also allows for the knitting together of a family. It's really cool when you can actually like your son or daughter-in-law and cultivate a relationship, because it means that transition, you really are able to welcome them into the family. You know who they are. Hi, here's the weird stranger I just met, and we got married. Okay, have a nice day. We'll be over for the holidays. I mean, it's so much nicer to start building that relationship before, and then you just transition into it. Dating is a weak model. I don't see it in the scriptures. I'm not saying it's forbidden because it's not in the scriptures. I just don't think people getting alone in dark corners is just a really smart idea. 16-year-olds do not need to be pushed to marry. And now it's even worse. It's like 10-year-olds. This is like crazy. And 12-year-olds. Look, what 12-year-old understands the ramifications of a lifelong commitment? I mean, life for a 12-year-old is 5 years. I mean, They don't have that concept. Um, and so, please, your 14-year-old, your 14-year-old needs to be encouraged. That they're okay. They're all right. They don't gotta do that right at 16. Okay, it's all right. No dating unbelievers. I know it sometimes God makes it work, but it's not what we should shoot for. Unequal yoking just isn't a good idea. Okay, if there are males in the audience, okay, guys, marriage is not a substitute for a cold shower. Sorry, it's the way our society is. Okay? And I'm just encouraging a little bit, cool it down a little. Um, I used to laugh when they said that young men should be engaged in some form of exercise. I'm the kid with tape on his classes. You know what? A little bit of physical activity is not a bad thing, especially for a young buck. If you're intellectual like me, maybe the gym teacher could do what I'm doing now, and teach you to beat your own best time. But these are things that need to be said. It's uncomfortable. Yeah, this is controversial. Just wait until we try to apply creational things to transgenderism and hermaphroditism and things like that. Be praying as I think about that program, because it's something that wasn't even on my topic list, and now as I'm thinking about it, it would really be good. Um, but we just need to take this seriously. Um, so Jesus upheld a creational intent for marriage and sex. We have to do the same thing. We just have to. Jesus held a higher standard than most Second Temple rabbis. We need to hold the highest standard possible. Okay? This isn't to, don't mistreat other brothers and sisters who have had a rough, bumpy path. This isn't to go ahead and chastise anybody. This is just, we need to be the people that reflect Jesus the best we can. And so that's what I'm encouraging. Now you have a Second Temple sort of view of the exception passage and what Jesus is dealing with. And if nothing else, you will see him as somebody trying to uphold a very high standard when there are a lot of varied opinions around. And he had to deal with people who had gotten varied opinions too. So, tough program, hopefully sensible program. Hopefully you can put this in biblical theology a little better too, and see that the image of marriage is the image God uses with Israel. He will be their husband again. They have not married another deity, and the bill of divorcement did not necessarily terminate all rights to covenant and all covenant in a biblical theological spectrum. And so that's basically where I'm leaving you tonight. I hope that this was good. Um, Tough stuff. Um, God loves you where you're at. So do I. Let's leave a testimony with the world of our faithful God as best we can in the situations we find ourselves with. Well, I'm going to stop the stream and allow a little bit more talk. And I have a new topic to put in my topic list. And I have some questions to answer for somebody who was kind enough to send them related to where to start studying the Talmud and going through that. And then I think there was a second question. So thanks much for being here tonight. It's good to have a nice, more lengthy broadcast. And so I am thrilled with that. I'm honestly going to get about a quart of water to drink. And look forward to being with you Wednesday. I am working on dealing with a Karaite guy who says that the Greek Jesus is in opposition to the God of the Hebrew Scriptures. So, yes, I'm going to be on Saturday night with David Wood. We're going to discuss the recent terrorist incident in New Jersey. I've started looking at vocab's video, and I started looking up information on the Sitmar sect, just so that I could have stuff in my head. So be praying for that. I'm excited about being on David's channel, and I really would like to do the best job I can. So I appreciate your prayers for Saturday night. And you can pray that I get there on time and we get everything set up. I am excited, and hopefully that will work well. And I probably will take that if you don't see it live. And I think David will let me do it as a premiere on my channel. So I will have it for you guys too. And so I'm excited about that. I'm going to say good night. My friend Stan Meyer. Good. Someone says they're praying. Yes. I appreciate that. I have a friend of mine, Stan Meyer, who I'm probably going to try to call back. But I am really pleased that you all have been here. You are such great support in the various ways that you do it. So you all have different parts, but you're all part. Isn't that neat?